The land was the first and final argument. This was Montana, a territory carved from raw wilderness, a place that tested a soul in the years between 1850 and 1900. The mountains were the spine of this place, jagged peaks of granite and pine that tore at the sky. The sky itself was an ocean, a crushing weight of blue that made a person feel small, exposed. Below the peaks, the high plains and empty lands rolled on forever, a sea of tough grass baked brown by the summer sun. It was a country of extremes. The heat was a physical blow. The silence was a presence, a vast, ringing quiet broken only by the shriek of a hawk or the constant, weary voice of the wind. That wind smelled of dust, of cedar, and of the dry electric promise of distant lightning. Life here was a gamble, played every day against an unforgiving house. The land did not love. It simply existed, magnificent and indifferent, and it demanded strength from every living thing. The wolf, the grizzly, the rattlesnake, the lone rider pushing his weary horse toward an unseen horizon. Survival was a full-time occupation. It bred a certain kind of person, hard and quiet and watchful. And it was into this furnace that Martha arrived. Martha was a product of the East, a world of cobblestones, brick walls, and rules that wrapped around a woman like bindings. She was young, with a strong frame built for work, not for show, and eyes the color of plain brown earth. But in those eyes, a fire burned. It was the fire of a profound and restless energy, a deep-seated need for a life larger than the one prescribed for her. She had suffocated in the parlors of Philadelphia, in the endless, airless afternoons of polite conversation. She had felt her spirit shrinking, becoming a small, tidy thing she no longer recognized. She wanted to breathe air that had not been breathed by a million other people. She dreamed of freedom, a word she tasted in her mind, though she did not truly know its flavor. She had seen a small notice in a newspaper, tucked away between advertisements for cough remedies and farm equipment. A ranch in Montana territory required a cook, good wages, room and board provided. The words had leaped out at her. Montana. The name itself sounded like a mountain range, a cattle ranch. She had pictures in her head, drawn from dime novels and whispered stories, of wide-open spaces and rugged, honorable men. She knew it would be hard. She was not afraid of work. Work, she understood. It was the idleness, the waiting, the slow withering she could not bear. So she had gathered her small savings, packed a single trunk with practical dresses, her best knives wrapped in cloth, and a small, worn book of family recipes. She told no one of her final plan until it was done. She had endured the long, clattering journey by train, the grit and the noise and the endless sameness of the prairie passing by the window. Then had come the stagecoach, a bone-rattling box that threw her against strangers for days. And now, this, a simple buckboard wagon, its wheels tracing two thin lines in the endless dust, pulling her toward the double-bar ranch. The man driving the wagon had said perhaps 10 words to her in 6 hours. He was part of the land, weathered and silent. Martha did not mind. She looked out, really looked. For the first time, the sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. It was not beautiful in the way a painting was beautiful. It was raw, powerful, and terrifying. The mountains seemed to watch her. She felt stripped bare, as if the wind were peeling away her old life, leaving something new and untested exposed. She was coming to this place to cook, to bake bread, to roast beef, to make stews for hungry men. It was a simple job, a safe harbor she had chosen. She would be an island of domestic peace in this wild land. She held that thought close. It was her anchor. She did not know, could not possibly know, that the land itself had other plans, and that her idea of safety was about to be burned away like fog in the morning sun. Miles away, high on a ridge that overlooked the valley, a man stood so still he seemed part of the rock. His name was Chaska. He was a man of the people who had been born of this land, whose ancestors were buried in it. He was a warrior, and his body was a map of that life. He was tall, with the lean, hard muscle of a runner and a hunter. His intelligence was sharp, a tool honed by necessity. He was a man of deep and powerful independence, yet he was bound by a duty that was more absolute than any chain. His life had one purpose, one great North Star: to protect the lands of his people, to guard their freedom in a time when that freedom was evaporating like water on hot stone. He was a man of few words, because words seemed small against the backdrop of the mountains and the urgency of his task. He lived in a world of constant conflict, not just with the settlers who pushed deeper into the valleys, building their square houses and stringing their sharp wires, but with himself. He fought every day to maintain his control, to hold on to the dignity and the ways of his people. It was a lonely battle. The world was changing with the speed of a prairie fire, and he was trying to stand against the wind. He watched the wagon. It was a small, crawling insect in the vastness below. He had seen it for an hour, a plume of dust that signaled another arrival, another piece of the world he knew being chipped away. He did not see Martha. He saw the ranch it was bound for, the double bar. He saw the cattle that ate the grass his people's horses needed. He saw the fences that cut the land, stopping the free movement of the buffalo that were almost gone, stopping the free movement of his own people. Each wagon, each new face, was a threat. His heart was a hard knot in his chest. It was a familiar feeling, this blend of cold anger and a sorrow so deep it felt like part of the earth itself. He was a guardian, and the thing he was guarding was dying. He shifted his weight, a movement as silent and fluid as a shadow. His eyes, sharp and clear, missed nothing. The heat, the distance, the buzz of a fly near his ear. He was a part of this place. The wind was his brother. The stone was his shield. He knew the secret paths, the hidden springs, the language of the animals. This knowledge was his power, his only true weapon against the tide. He would watch. He would wait. He would do what he must. That was his law. Martha's wagon finally crested a low rise, and she saw the ranch. It was not the picturesque image from her mind. It was a raw, functional scar on the land. A long, low bunkhouse, a larger main house that was probably the owner's, a blacksmith's shed, and a web of corrals. All of it was built from rough-hewn logs, silvered by the sun and the wind. The smell of wood smoke and livestock was heavy in the air. A dog barked, a sharp, ragged sound. She could hear the clang of a hammer on an anvil, a rhythmic, lonely sound. This was it, her new home, her new life. She gripped the edge of the seat, her knuckles aching. The driver pulled the horses to a stop in the dusty yard. A few men paused their work, turning to look. Their faces were bearded, burned by the sun, their eyes squinting. They looked hard as the land they worked. Martha felt a small tremor of fear, the one she had been pushing down. This was real. There was no turning back. She was a lone woman, here to make a life among strangers. She thought of her simple plan. She would be the cook. She would be safe. She would be free. She took a deep breath of the hot, dusty air, tasting the juniper and the faint, unsettling wildness beneath it. She did not know that high in the hills, a pair of eyes had marked her arrival, not as a woman, but as a symbol. She did not know that her search for simple peace had brought her to the very edge of a conflict as old as the mountains themselves, and that she was about to meet a man who was the living embodiment of that wild, untamed world. Her life as a cook was about to begin, but her real education, the one that would break her and remake her, was waiting in the silence of the high peaks. Martha stepped down from the buckboard. The ground felt solid after so long, but her legs were unsteady. The men who had paused their work stared. Their eyes were hard. She was an object, a curiosity, a thing that did not belong. She smoothed her dusty dress, a useless gesture. The man who had driven her, Jed, just grunted and began unharnessing the team, his part of the bargain complete. A man came from the main house. He was broad, with a thick gray beard and a hat stained with years of sweat. He was Mr. Harrison, the ranch owner. He looked her over, his gaze practical, like he was judging livestock. He did not smile. He just nodded. "Welcome to the Double Bar. Miss, your quarters are off the kitchen. Jed will show you. The kitchen is yours. Breakfast is at 4, dinner at noon, supper at 7. The men eat a lot. Do not let the stores run low." That was all. He turned and went back inside. The weight of her decision settled on her. There was no welcome. There was no kindness. There was a job. 4 in the morning. She followed Jed, her single trunk heavy in his grip, toward a low building attached to the main house. The kitchen was huge, dark, and dominated by a massive black iron stove that looked more like a furnace. A door led to a tiny, windowless room with a narrow cot. This was her home. The first days were a blur of smoke, heat, and heavy lifting. She rose in total darkness, the stars still bright in the cold black sky. She wrestled with cast-iron pots heavy enough to anchor a ship. She kneaded dough for bread in a trough big enough to bathe in. The men, 10 of them, filed in for meals, ate with silent, animal focus, and left. They did not speak to her. They did not look at her. She was a pair of hands that produced food. She was the cook. She was lonelier than she had ever been in her life. This isolation was a different kind from the suffocation of the East. This was an emptiness, a void. She was surrounded by the immense, crushing beauty of the land. But she was a prisoner in her kitchen. After 3 days, the pressure inside her was too much. She needed to breathe. After the noon meal, with the kitchen cleaned and the men back out on the range, she walked away from the ranch compound. She told herself she was looking for wild onions, or perhaps some mint near the creek. But really, she was just walking. She followed the sound of the water, a thin trickle in the dry heat. The air was clearer here, away from the smell of the corrals. She found the creek and knelt, splashing the cold water on her face. It felt wonderful. She looked up. The hills rolled away in every direction. They all looked the same, brown and green, dotted with rock and scrub pine. She felt a sudden, small thrill. This was it, the freedom she had wanted. She stood up and decided to climb the nearest rise, just to see the view. She walked for an hour, or perhaps 2. The sun was hot. The view from the top of the rise was just more hills, more mountains in the distance. She turned to look back at the ranch. She could not see it. A cold finger of panic touched her spine. She must have come over the wrong hill. She turned left, walked for 20 minutes, and climbed another rise. Nothing, just more land, more sky. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was hungry. She was lost, utterly, completely lost. Her heart began to pound. She was a fool, an Eastern fool who thought the wilderness was a garden. She picked a direction and began to walk, faster now, trying to fight down the rising tide of fear. She stumbled on a loose rock, falling to her knees. She was breathing too fast. She would die out here. The wolves or the sun would get her. She forced herself to be still. She closed her eyes. She needed to think. When she opened them, he was there. He was not 10 yards away, standing beside a tall ponderosa pine. He had made no sound. He was simply there, as if he had grown from the earth. He was tall, dressed in buckskin leggings and a simple cloth shirt. His black hair was long. He held a bow. He was an Indian. All the stories she had ever heard, the terrifying tales, rushed into her mind. She scrambled backward, pushing herself against the ground. He did not move. He just watched her. His face was still, his expression unreadable. But his eyes were the sharpest things she had ever seen. They seemed to see right through her fear, to the core of her. There was no malice in his gaze. There was nothing, just a deep, quiet intensity. She finally found her voice, a dry whisper. "Please, I am lost." He looked at her for a long moment. She felt he was weighing her, judging her worth. Then, slowly, he raised one arm and pointed. He pointed to her right, toward a V shape in the distant hills she had not noticed. He said nothing. She stared at his hand, then at his face. He was waiting. She pushed herself to her feet, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Thank you," she said. He did not nod. He did not acknowledge her thanks. He simply watched her. She felt a strange flush of anger. He was so arrogant, so silent. He made her feel small, but in a different way than the ranchmen did. They ignored her. This man saw her and seemed unimpressed. She turned and began walking in the direction he had pointed, her back stiff. She felt his eyes on her for a long time. When she finally dared to look back, he was gone. He had vanished as silently as he had appeared. It took her nearly an hour, but she found the creek again and followed it back to the ranch, her legs shaking with relief and something else, something she could not name. That night, she lay on her cot. The image of his face, his unblinking eyes, burned into her mind. His silence was louder than any shout. His stillness was more powerful than any threat. The next day, the world ended. She was outside, beating a rug. When the sound began, it was a low, rising thunder. Not a storm. It was high, thin, and terrifying. Yelling. From the corrals. One of the men shouted a single word, a word that froze her blood. "Riders." She looked to the north. A line of horsemen, perhaps 20, was pouring over the rise. They were riding hard, kicking up a plume of dust. They were not cowboys. She could see the pain on their bodies, the lances in their hands. The ranch exploded into chaos. Men ran for rifles. "Mister!" Harrison bellowed orders from the porch. The first shots cracked the air. Martha stood frozen, the rug beater still in her hand. One of the riders saw her. He broke from the main group and galloped directly at her, a hatchet raised in his hand. She screamed and ran. She did not run toward the house, where the fighting was. She ran the way she had gone yesterday. She ran toward the creek, toward the hills. She ran for her life. She could hear the horse behind her, the heavy, pounding hooves. She dove into a thicket of wild plum bushes, scratching her face and arms. The horse thundered past. She lay hidden, her breath sobbing in her chest. The air was full of smoke and screams. The gunfire was constant. She was terrified. She had to get away. She pushed out of the thicket and ran deeper into the wilderness. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to run from the fire and the noise. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs were jelly. She finally fell, tumbling down a loose scree slope, landing in a dusty heap at the bottom. She was miles from the ranch. She was lost again, but this time it was different. This time, she was being hunted. She heard a noise, horses, not from the ranch, from the hills above her. Two of the riders had seen her. They were coming down the slope, picking their way carefully. She was trapped. She had no weapon. She had nowhere to run. She pressed herself against the rocks, trying to be invisible. It was useless. They had seen her. They reached the bottom and stopped, looking at her. They were young men, their faces grim, their eyes hot with the fight. They spoke to each other in a language she did not understand. One of them dismounted and started walking toward her. She looked for a rock, a stick, anything. There was nothing. This was it. This was where her foolish dream of freedom had brought her. A sound, like a hawk, his call, cut the air. Both men froze. They looked up. On the ridge above them, silhouetted against the bright blue sky, was a single rider. He was still as stone. It was him, the man from yesterday, Chaska. The two men shouted something at him. It sounded like a challenge, an insult. Chaska did not move. Then, in a blur, he raised his bow. An arrow appeared. It flew. The man walking toward Martha cried out and fell, an arrow in his chest. The second rider yelled in fury. He kicked his horse, charging up the slope toward Chaska, raising his rifle. Chaska was already moving. His own horse, a powerful Appaloosa, leaped down the slope, meeting the charge. They met in a crash of bodies. Chaska was off his horse, a knife in his hand. It was over in seconds. The second rider fell, and his horse ran off, wild with panic. Chaska stood over the fallen man, breathing hard. He was unmarked. He turned, his chest rising and falling. He looked at Martha. She was still pressed against the rock, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He had just saved her life. He had just ended 2 others. He was terrifying. He was the most alive thing she had ever seen. He walked toward her. His face was dark, not with anger, but with a kind of deep, cold resolve. He still held the knife. She flinched. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes scanned her, from her torn dress to her scratched face. He saw her fear. He saw her weakness. His gaze was heavy, filled with a deep skepticism, a profound doubt. He did not see a woman. He saw a problem. He saw a piece of the world that had brought the fire and the death to his land. He finally spoke. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. "You do not belong here," he said. Martha found her voice. It was small, but it was steady. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of being weak. You saved me." His face did not change. He looked back toward the smoke that was still rising from the ranch. He looked at the bodies of the men he had just dispatched. He looked back at her. "He did not save you. He said he saved himself the trouble of watching you die. Now you are his trouble." He turned his back on her, walking to his horse. He whistled, and the horse came to him. He mounted in one fluid motion. He looked down at her. "The men who did this," he said, "they are not my people, but they are born of this land. They fight what you have brought. You are a child. You are weak. You will not survive this." Martha stood up, her legs trembling. She was angry. She was terrified. But she was also alive. She lifted her chin. "I am not weak." His lip curled, a tiny, fractional movement. It was not a smile. It was a sneer. He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time, she thought he saw something beyond her dress and her skin. He saw the fire. He saw the stubbornness. He saw the same energy that had pushed her across a continent. He saw it, and he did not trust it. He believed she was a fragile thing from the East, a woman who would shatter at the first touch of the real, hard world. And she, in that moment, looked at him and saw a man as hard and unforgiving as the mountains. A man who judged her. A man who dismissed her purely because she was a woman, and a woman from a world he despised. The lines were drawn. They were alone. The ranch was burning. The wilderness was all around them. And they were tied together by an act of violence, bound by a mistrust as deep and as wide as the sky above them. He did not offer her a hand. He did not offer her a place on his horse. He simply stared down at her, his face a mask of stone, and nudged his horse forward with a press of his heels. He was leaving. For a second, Martha's feet were rooted to the ground. He would leave her. He would leave her out here to die. After all, the smoke from the ranch was a thick, oily plume against the sky. The silence of the hills rushed in, filled with terror. No, she would not be left. She scrambled, her torn skirt catching on the brush, and began to walk, then half jog, after him. She would not beg, but she would not be abandoned. She would follow. He did not look back. He simply set his horse to a steady walk, a pace just fast enough to make her work for it. They walked for hours. The sun was a hammer. Her shoes, the thin leather shoes of an Eastern woman, were never made for this. The soles were thin, and every rock was a fresh agony. Her feet began to blister, and then the blisters broke. She walked in a haze of pain. Her thirst was a living thing, a fire in her throat. She had run from the ranch with nothing. Still, she did not speak. She did not ask him to stop. She did not complain. She fixed her eyes on his back, on the fluid, easy way he sat his horse, and she put one foot in front of the other. It became a rhythm. Pain, dust, sun, his back. She poured all of her energy, all of her stubborn will, into that simple, agonizing act of following. She would not be weak. She would not prove him right. Chaska knew she was there. He could hear her ragged breathing. He could hear the scrape of her ruined shoes on the gravel. He was testing her. He was pushing her to see where she would break. He expected tears. He expected pleas. They did not come. He rode on, his face grim, but a tiny, unwilling flicker of curiosity had been lit. Late in the afternoon, when Martha thought she could not possibly take another step, that she would simply fall into the dust and let the land take her, he stopped. He had led them to a high-wooded canyon where a spring trickled from the rocks. He dismounted, not looking at her, and knelt by the water, drinking from his cupped hands. Martha stumbled forward and collapsed by the spring, pushing her face into the water, drinking so fast she choked. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. She drank until her stomach ached, then splashed the icy water onto her face, her arms, her bleeding feet. The relief was so profound it was almost a new kind of pain. She finally sat back, her body trembling with exhaustion. He was watching her. His expression was still hard, but the contempt had lessened. It was replaced by a blank, calculating look. He reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a strip of dried meat. It was dark and tough. He tossed it to her. It landed in the dirt by her knee. She looked at the jerky, then at him. He was eating his own piece, his jaw working steadily. She picked it up, wiped the dust from it, and bit down. It was tough as leather, salty and smoky. She had to tear at it with her teeth. It was the hardest meal she had ever eaten, and it was delicious. When she had finished, he stood up. "The ranch is gone," he said. His voice was flat. "The men who survived took the herd and the wagons east, toward the river. We find them." He was not asking. He was telling her. Her job, her simple, safe job, was gone, burned to the ground. The men had left. She was alone in this wilderness with a man who saw her as a burden. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Why are you helping me?" Chaska turned his gaze to the high peaks, gold in the setting sun. "You are not my people," he said, "but you are a woman, alone. The men who did this, the ones who burned your ranch, they are my enemies too. They bring war where there should be peace. They stain the land, leaving you for them, or for the wolves. This is not our way." He looked back at her. "But you are still weak. You will slow me down." "I will not," she said, the words surprising her with their force. "I kept up." A flicker of something passed through his eyes. "You walked," he conceded. "Now, we ride." He whistled, and his horse, which had been grazing nearby, came to him. He motioned for her to stand. He put his hands on her waist, and before she could react, he had lifted her, light as a sack of flour, and placed her sideways on the horse's back, in front of him. She landed with a small oof against his chest. Her entire body stiffened. She was pressed against him. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest and legs, the warmth of his body. She smelled him. He smelled of pine and smoke and dust and something else, something wild and male that was completely foreign to her. She was terrified and, in a strange, deep way, she had never felt safer. He swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to hold the reins, caging her in. "Hold on," he said. It was not a request. He urged the horse forward, and they moved into the twilight, much faster than before. They found the ranch crew 2 days later, or rather, Chaska found them. He had tracked them with an ease that baffled Martha. The survivors, 5 men including Mr. Harrison, had salvaged one wagon, the one that held the main food supplies, and were pushing the terrified herd toward a large, defensible valley. They were exhausted, spooked, and grieving. When Chaska rode into their camp with Martha, the men grabbed their rifles. Harrison, his face haggard, stepped forward. "That's far enough," he growled. Chaska reined in, his hand raised, palm out. "I bring your cook," he said. The men stared. They had assumed she was dead. Harrison's gaze softened for just a moment as he looked at Martha. "Miss," he said, nodding. "We thought, well, we're glad you are safe." He looked back at Chaska, his suspicion returning. "Why?" "She is not a fighter," Chaska said simply. "This is where she belongs." He slid off the horse and reached up for Martha. She avoided his hands, sliding down clumsily on her own, her legs aching. She was back with her own people, but it felt strange. After 2 days of silence, of watching the landscape move by, of being intensely aware of the man behind her, this camp felt loud and chaotic. The men's relief at seeing her was quickly replaced by the grim reality of their situation. "Well, Martha," Harrison said, trying to force a heartiness he did not feel, "your kitchen is smaller. We're on the move. We have to keep the herd safe. We need you." Her world had been reduced to the back of a wagon and a patch of dirt. Her stove was now a pit in the ground. Her pantry was a few sacks of flour, beans, and salt. Her job was no longer just to cook. It was to perform a daily miracle, to make food out of nothing, in the wind, in the dust, while constantly on the move. She learned she had to. She baked bread in a heavy Dutch oven, burying it in coals. She learned to make stew from the stringy beef of a lost calf. She learned to guard her precious sack of coffee from moisture and mice. She learned to make her fire with wet wood, to keep it going in the rain, to scour her pots with sand and river water. Her hands, which had been soft, became raw, then blistered, then calloused. Her face burned red, then peeled, then burned a deep brown. Her dresses were torn and stained. She was tired, bone tired, every minute of every day. But she did not complain. She just worked. She cooked. She endured. And the men, who had first seen her as a useless ornament, began to respect her. Chaska was gone. He had vanished back into the hills as silently as he had come. But she knew he was out there. Sometimes, on a high ridge, she would see a lone rider, watching them. The men would grumble, nervous, but Martha felt a strange calm. He was not hunting them. He was watching. One evening, a week into their desperate trek, she was gathering brush for her fire. She reached down to grab a dry piece of wood and froze. A sound, a dry, buzzing rattle, came from the exact spot her hand had been about to touch. She did not scream. She did not move. She looked down, coiled in the dust. Less than a foot away was a rattlesnake, its head up, its tail a blur. One of the cowboys, a young man named Billy, saw her. "Don't move, miss," he whispered, his face pale, reaching slowly for the pistol at his hip. Martha's heart was a drum against her ribs, but her mind was clear. She had killed rats in the cellar in Philadelphia. This was just a bigger rat, a more dangerous one. She knew Billy was nervous. A shaky shot might miss, or might just make the snake strike. Her heavy iron skillet was on the wagon tailgate, 5 feet away. Slowly, deliberately, she moved her hand, not away from the snake, but to her side. She took 1 step back. The snake rattled louder, coiling tighter. "I got it, miss, I got it," Billy stammered, raising his gun. "No," Martha said, her voice low and even. "Do not shoot. You'll scatter the herd." In one swift, fluid motion, she lunged for the wagon, grabbed the skillet by its long handle, and brought it down on the snake with all her strength. There was a sickening crunch. She struck it again and again, her breath hissing between her teeth, until the rattling stopped and the creature was a ruined mess. She stood breathing heavily, the skillet still raised. The camp was silent. Billy stared, his gun halfway out of its holster. Harrison had his mouth open. From the edge of the trees, 30 yards away, a twig snapped. Chaska was there, on foot, leaning against a pine. He had been watching the entire time. He had not moved to help. He had been watching to see what she would do. He looked at the snake. He looked at the skillet in her hand. He looked at her face, streaked with dirt and sweat, her eyes blazing. He gave her a single, curt nod. It was a small thing, but it felt like a medal. It was the first time he had looked at her as an equal, as someone who belonged in this land. He turned and melted back into the shadows. Martha's knees suddenly felt weak. She let the skillet drop. She was starting to feel something for this man, this hard, silent, dangerous man. It was more than gratitude. It was a fearful, powerful pull. She was drawn to his strength, to his absolute harmony with this terrible, beautiful land. But she was afraid. She was afraid that to him, she would always be the creature he had to save, a part of the wildness he felt responsible for, no different from a lost calf or a broken bird. She did not know that he, too, was changing. He had watched her. He had seen her walk until her feet bled, without a word. He had seen her master the fire and the iron. He had just watched her kill a snake that would have made a grown man pause. This was not the weak, fragile creature he had first seen. This woman had a core of iron. She had a spirit as tough as the mountain juniper. It intrigued him. It challenged his deepest beliefs about her people. And, though he would have died before admitting it, he was beginning to feel a pull of his own. This woman, this Martha, was not weak. She was a survivor. And he was beginning to realize that he wanted to be near her, to see what she would do next. The herd was a river of horns and dust, a slow, weary river of animals. The men were ghosts, riding in a cloud of their own exhaustion. Mister, Harrison pushed them hard, afraid to stay in one place for long, afraid of what was behind them. Martha's world was the wagon, the fire pit, and the endless ache in her bones. She had become a creature of pure function. She rose, she built her fire, she boiled coffee, she fried salt pork, she packed, she rode, she unpacked, she built another fire. She had not had a clean bath in weeks. She had not slept for more than 2 hours at a stretch. She was living on a raw, animal level. Chaska remained a shadow. He was not part of their group. He rode parallel to them. A mile off, a dark shape on a ridge. He was their unseen, unpaid, and deeply mistrusted guardian. The men watched for him. They talked about him in low voices. They did not understand his motives. They were grateful, and they were afraid. Martha did not speak of him, but she looked for him. Every morning, when the sky first turned from black to gray, she would scan the hills. When she saw him, a quiet, small part of her settled. It was a feeling she did not trust and did not examine. They were pushing through a thick, high forest of lodgepole pine, the air close and smelling of resin. The sky, visible in patches, had turned a sick, greenish yellow. Chaska had ridden in closer that afternoon, his face turned to the west. He spoke a single word to Harrison: storm. It came just before dusk. The air did not cool, it grew heavy, electric. A low, vibrating hum filled the world. Then the wind hit, a solid wall that tore through the trees. Branches snapped. The cattle bellowed, turning in on themselves, their eyes white. Then came the rain. It was not rain. It was a solid sheet of water, driven by a wind that screamed, hail the size of beans. Then the size of marbles followed. It struck the wagon roof like drum fire. The world dissolved into white, roaring chaos. The men were shouting, lost in the noise, trying to hold the terrified herd. Harrison yelled at Martha to stay with the wagon, to protect the supplies. She was already working, pulling a heavy canvas over the flour sacks, her hands numb with the cold and the stinging hail. A massive pine, struck by lightning, exploded. It was not a crack, it was a bomb. The tree fell, crashing across the trail not 20 yards from the wagon. Martha's mules screamed, rearing in their harnesses. She ran to their heads, grabbing the bridles, fighting to hold them, to soothe them. Her voice lost in the storm. Someone was suddenly beside her. It was Chaska. He had come from nowhere. His horse was gone. He did not speak. He simply put his shoulder to the lead mule, his hands firm on its head, adding his strength to hers. The mules, smelling his calm, settled. The rain was now a liquid wall. The ground was awash. "The creek!" he yelled, his voice barely audible over the roar. "It will rise." He grabbed her arm. It was not a gentle touch. It was iron. He pulled her away from the wagon, away from the trail, up the steep side of the canyon. She scrambled, half pulled, half climbing. He seemed to see in the dark, in the blinding rain. He pushed aside a curtain of heavy, wet branches and shoved her into a shallow opening in the rock, a space under a massive granite overhang. He followed her in, shaking the water from his hair like a wolf. The space was tight, perhaps 8 feet deep, 10 feet wide, but it was dry. The roar of the storm was muffled. Outside, the world was ending. Inside, it was suddenly, shockingly quiet. There was no room for a fire. There was no light. They were just two shapes in the absolute darkness. Martha sank to the dry, dusty floor, her back against the rock. She was shaking, not from fear, but from a bone-deep cold. He stood for a long moment, watching the storm, a silhouette against the gray, churning water. Then he sat. He did not sit near her. He sat on the other side of the small cave, his back to the wall, his knees drawn up. He was perhaps 5 feet away, but in the tiny, enclosed space, it felt like 5 inches. The silence grew. It was not an empty silence. It was filled with the sound of the storm and the sound of their breathing. Martha could hear her own breath, ragged and unsteady. She could hear his, slow, deep and measured. She wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to stop the shivering. She was soaked to the skin. Her teeth chattered. She heard a small movement. His shape shifted in the dark. He had taken something off. He tossed a heavy weight across the space. It landed on her. It was his buckskin shirt. It was heavy and warm from his body, and it smelled of him, that scent of pine and smoke and rain. She looked at his shadow. She could just make out his chest. Bare. She did not speak. She did not know what to say. She pulled the thick, heavy shirt around her shoulders. It was an incredible, shocking comfort. The shaking began to ease. They sat for hours. The storm raged, then lessened, then raged again. They did not speak. There were no words for this. Martha found herself in a strange, suspended state. She should be terrified. She was lost, cold, and trapped with a man her world called a savage. But her fear was gone. She was simply, profoundly, intensely aware of him. His stillness was not empty. It was full of power. She felt the presence of his body in the dark, a solid, living thing. She began to understand, in a way she could not have in the daylight, that his silence was a language. He was listening, to the storm, to the land, and, she realized, to her, she was not afraid of him. She was not afraid of the storm. She closed her eyes, pulling his shirt tighter, and for the first time since she had left Philadelphia, she felt a strange, deep sense of peace. Chaska was rigid. He had forced himself to sit apart from her. This proximity was a dangerous thing. She was a white woman. She was a weakness. He had told himself this, but she was not weak. He had watched her for weeks. He had seen her will, a thin blade of steel. He had seen her kill the snake. He had just seen her fight for the mules. Now, she sat in the dark, wearing his shirt, and she was quiet. She was not crying. She was not complaining. She was still like a small animal that knows how to wait out a storm. He respected stillness. He found his own harsh judgments being worn away, like stone under water. He was intensely aware of her. He could smell her, a faint, clean scent underneath the wet wool and the wood smoke. It was a scent that did not belong in his world, but here it was. It was a disturbing, humanizing, and deeply unwanted feeling. He had lived his life in a world of hard lines. His people, his enemies, the land. She was crossing those lines. She was becoming a person. The thought troubled him more than the storm. He had lived his life to protect the past. He was a guardian of what was this woman. She was something new. She was something that pointed to a future he did not understand and did not want. But as he sat there, in the quiet dark, listening to the rain and her steady breathing, he felt a part of his own rigid past begin to crack. The storm broke near dawn. They walked out of the cave into a world washed clean and broken. The creek was a brown, raging river. Trees were down everywhere. The wagon was still there, but half submerged in mud. The herd was scattered. It took them 3 more weeks of brutal, spirit-crushing work to regather the cattle and drag the wagon to the Musselshell River. They reached a tiny, dusty outpost, a collection of sod houses and tents that served as a trading post and stagecoach stop. It was the first sign of the larger world Martha had seen since the ranch. Harrison looked gray. He had lost 1/3 of the herd. "It is over," he told the men. "I will sell what is left here. I cannot pay you. I will give you what I can. You are free to go." The crew disbanded, the men drifting away, bitter and silent. Harrison gave Martha $20, a fortune, and his apologies. "You are a good woman, Martha," he said, his eyes avoiding hers. "You deserved better. The stage leaves for Fort Benton tomorrow. From there, you can get back east." Back east. The words hung in the air. Philadelphia, parlors, cobblestones, a life she had run from. She stood in the muddy street, her $20 in her hand, and felt a desolation deeper than any she had known on the trail. She had survived. But for what? To go back. A stagecoach, the very one Harrison had mentioned, was already there, mud-caked, its team being changed. A man stepped out. He was tall, thin, and dressed in a black wool suit. Despite the heat, he wore a stiff hat. He looked like a crow, misplaced and angry. He looked at the mud, at the rough men, at the raw, unfinished buildings, with an expression of pure distaste. His eyes scanned the street. He saw Martha. He stared, his eyes widening. He did not recognize her at first. Then he did. "Good Lord," he breathed, stepping forward. "Martha, Martha, is that you?" She did not know him. "Alistair Finch," he said, holding out a pale hand. "Your father's lawyer." She stared at his hand, then at her own, calloused and dirty. She did not take it. "What are you doing here?" "What am I am here for you, young lady," he said, his voice rising. "We have been searching for months. Your family is sick with worry. We heard you had taken a position at some godforsaken ranch. We heard it was attacked. My goodness, look at you. You look like a savage." He tried to take her arm. "You must come with me at once. Your father is not well. He wants you home. All is forgiven. We have your ticket. You will come home, where you are safe." Safe. The word felt like a trap. She looked at Mr. Finch. He was the East. He was rules and small rooms, an air that had been breathed too many times. He was offering her an escape from this hardship. He was offering her comfort. And she was suffocating. "I am not going," she said. Her voice was quiet. but it was hard. What? Finch looked at her as if she had lost her mind. Do not be absurd. You are a woman, alone, in this. You have no money, no protection. You have been through a terrible ordeal. You are coming with me. No, she said. She pulled her arm from his grasp. This is my life now. This is not a life, he hissed. This is animal survival. You are coming home. Chaska stood at the edge of the settlement, his horse grazing nearby. He had been watching. He had seen the stagecoach, the black-suited man. He knew this man. He was the world that came with paper, the world that fenced the land and killed the buffalo. He was the world that had taken everything. He saw Finch grab Martha's arm. He saw the anger in the man's face. A jolt, cold and pure, went through Chaska. It was a feeling he had not known for a very long time. It was rage. It was a dark, possessive anger that surprised him with its force. He had told himself she was a burden. He had told himself she would leave. Now the moment was here, and it felt like a knife in his gut. He saw Martha pull her arm away. He saw her stand straight, her chin up. He saw her face the man, this man of paper and rules. And she was not afraid. She was not the weak woman he had first seen. She was the woman who had killed the snake. She was the woman who had sat in the dark with him through the storm. He had lived his whole life fighting for the past, for the memory of his people. He was a guardian of ghosts. He looked at Martha, and he saw, with a clarity that shook him, that she was not a ghost. She was alive. She was fighting for her own life, right now, in the middle of this muddy street. A profound, tectonic shift happened inside him. The past was gone. He could not bring it back. He could only guard the land, the earth itself. But this woman... Perhaps a future was not about saving the past. Perhaps it was about building something new, something as hard and as real as she was. He did not know what it meant. The idea terrified him. To love, to connect, to build a life. That was a world he had locked away. He had thought it was lost to him forever. He watched her turn her back on the black-suited man. And he knew, with a terrible, breaking certainty, that he had to choose. He could remain a shadow, a guardian of what was. Or he could step into the light and fight for what could be. Alistair Finch's face, pale to begin with, turned a mottled red. He was a man who was never told no, least of all by a woman he considered a runaway. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a furious, placating hiss, as if speaking to a lunatic. Martha, you are unwell. You are in shock. You do not know what you are saying. I have a legal right, a duty of care, to see you return to your father. Now, be a sensible girl. Your old life, your home, it is all waiting for you. Think of clean sheets. Think of a proper bath. Think of food that is not this. He waved a dismissive hand at the raw settlement. Martha's mind was a battlefield. She was so tired. The image he painted, a bath, a soft bed, an end to this constant, grinding effort, an end to fear. It was a powerful lure. She could feel the pull of that old, safe life, a gravity that threatened to drag her back across the continent. She remembered the scent of her mother's parlor, the cool, polished wood of the piano. And then she remembered the feeling of suffocation, the invisible bindings, the airless afternoons. She looked at Finch, at his stiff collar and his hard, certain eyes. He was not offering her safety. He was offering her a cage, a pretty, familiar cage. She looked past him. At the edge of the collection of huts, Chaska was watching. He was still. He was not moving to help. He was not interfering. He was simply bearing witness. He was leaving the choice entirely to her. And that, more than anything, gave her strength. He was not trying to own her or save her. He was waiting to see who she was. I am not in shock. Mr. Finch, she said, her voice quiet but shaking with a new, hard strength. And I am not a girl. I am a woman. I am not going back. You have no right here. My duty is to myself." Finch's face hardened. The mask of civility dropped. "I see," he said, his voice like ice. "You have been corrupted by this place, by him." He cast a venomous look toward Chaska. "I had hoped to do this easily, but I have a responsibility." He raised his hand. Two men who had been standing by the stagecoach, rough-looking men in trail dust and store-bought coats, pushed themselves off the wall. They were not drivers. They were hired muscle. They moved to stand on either side of Finch, their hands on the pistols at their belts. "Miss," Finch said, his voice flat and final, "you will be getting on that coach, willingly. Or not. These gentlemen will escort you." The two men moved toward her. Martha's heart hammered. She took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. The street was mud. The men were between her and any hope of escape. The few remaining cowhands and trappers in the settlement watched with dull, incurious eyes. This was not their fight. "Mr. Finch, you cannot do this," she said, but her voice was thin. "I can, and I will," he said, "for your own protection." The first man reached for her arm. He never touched her. A shadow moved. It was Chaska. He had closed the distance of 30 yards in silence, with a speed that was not human. He was not there, and then he did not touch Finch. He did not go for Martha. He moved between her and the hired men. He was unarmed, or appeared to be. He had no rifle, no bow. He simply stood, placing his body between her and them. The hired men stopped. They were big. He was tall, but lean. They looked at each other. A small, arrogant smirk on one man's face. "Get out of the way, Chief," the man said. "This is white folks' business." "She stays," Chaska said. His voice was low, and it carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. Finch, protected by his men, was emboldened. "Caesar!" he shrieked. "And if this savage interferes, put him down." The first man lunged, shoving at Chaska's chest to push him aside, while the second man grabbed for Martha. The movement was too fast to follow. Chaska did not block the push. He used the man's own momentum, sidestepping, his hand striking the man's wrist. There was a sharp, sickening crack. The man screamed, his arm hanging limp, his pistol falling into the mud. The second man, seeing his partner fall, fumbled for his own weapon. He was not fast enough. Chaska's foot shot out, striking the man's knee. The joint buckled with a sound like wet wood splitting. The man went down, howling, clutching his ruined leg. It had taken less than 3 seconds. 2 armed men were on the ground, broken and writhing. No blood, no gunfire, just a terrible, brutal efficiency. Chaska straightened. He had not drawn a weapon. He had not raised his voice. He simply stood, breathing slowly, his eyes fixed on Alistair Finch. Finch was frozen, his face the color of ash. His protection was gone. He was alone, in the mud, in front of a man who was the living embodiment of the wilderness he so despised. Chaska took 1 step toward him. Finch stumbled backward, falling over his own feet, landing in the filthy street. He crab-walked backward, his black suit stained, his hat gone. This is against the law," he sputtered. "I will have the army. I will have you hanged. This is kidnapping." Chaska looked down at him. The contempt in his eyes was a physical force. "Your law," he said, "is paper. Your words are wind. This is the land, and you are weak. She is not." He spoke the words with a finality that was absolute. He did not look at Finch again. He turned to Martha. She was trembling, her hand over her mouth. She had just seen him break 2 men for her. He was not her guardian. He was her champion. He did not speak. He just looked at her. He was asking the question again, but this time it was different. He was not a passive witness. He was an active participant. He had drawn a line in the mud. Now, she had to cross it. Her old life was there, sputtering and ruined in the mud, personified by Alistair Finch. Her new life was standing in front of her, silent, dangerous, and real. The choice was made. It had been made weeks ago, in a cave, in a storm, when she pulled his shirt around her. She walked past the groaning men. She walked past Alistair Finch. She walked to Chaska and stopped, standing in front of him. He held her gaze for a long second. Then he turned. He whistled. His Appaloosa, which had been standing patient, trotted to him. He swung up onto its back. He looked down at her. This time, he held out his hand. She took it. His grip was hard and warm. In one motion, he pulled her up, seating her in front of him. Just as he had done after the fire, she settled against his chest. His arm came around her. He did not need to hold the reins. He pressed his heels to the horse, and they rode out of the settlement, leaving the screams, the mud, and the man in the black suit behind. They rode for hours, into the high country. Neither of them spoke. The tension was a living thing, a third presence on the horse. Martha was vibrating. She had just committed an act that could never be undone. She had turned her back on her family, her world, her entire past. She had chosen this. She had chosen him. But what had she chosen? A life on the run. A man who was a stranger. A man who spoke in silence and acted with a swift, cold violence. Her fear was not for her safety. It was for her future. She had just staked her entire soul on this man, and she did not even know why he had done it. He finally stopped as the sun was bleeding into the western peaks. He chose a spot high on a ridge, a small, grassy clearing sheltered by tall pines. He dismounted, then reached up and lifted her down. His hands were gentle on her waist. He set about making a camp with an economy of motion she had come to admire. He did not build a fire. It was too dangerous. They would be hunted now. Finch would not give up. He would send the law, or what passed for it. He sat with his back to a pine, his rifle across his knees, watching the valley below as it sank into shadow. Martha sat opposite him, her arms wrapped around her own knees. The silence was immense. It was the same silence from the cave, but now it was filled with 1,000 unasked questions. She could not bear it. She had to know. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was a small, thin sound in the vast twilight. He did not move. He did not look at her. He continued to scan the valley. "Why did you do that?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. "He was a weak man," he said at last. "He was not weak. He had men. He had the law. He was right. I was his responsibility." "He was weak," Chaska said again, his voice flat. "He uses paper. He uses hired men. He does not see. He tried to put bindings on you." "And you," she whispered. "What did you do? What does this mean?" He finally turned his head. He looked at her. His face was in shadow, but she could feel the intensity of his gaze, a physical touch. He had lived his life by a code. He had lived for his ancestors, for his land, for a past that was turning to dust. He had just broken that code. He had acted for himself, for her. He was a man who did not know how to speak of such things. The words were new in his mouth, foreign and hard. "You were leaving," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a simple statement of what he had seen. "I had nowhere else to go," she said, her voice breaking. "My old life, I cannot go back. But what life is this hiding in the hills being hunted? What do you want from me?" He looked away, back to the valley. She could see the struggle in the set of his shoulders. He was a man fighting a war with himself. The war between the man he had been, the guardian, and the man he was becoming. He turned back to her. This time, his eyes met hers fully, in the deep, dying light. She saw something she had never seen there before. Not anger, not pity, not even respect. It was something raw, a need, a terrible, profound vulnerability that was more powerful than all his strength. He had made his choice, and it had cost him. He had stepped out of the shadows. "I watched you," he said, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear it. "I watched you walk. I watched you kill the snake. I watched you stand against him." He paused, and the silence was absolute. "I wanted you to be my woman." The words landed. They were not a question. They were not a romantic plea. They was a confession, a statement of a truth as bare and as hard as the granite rock they were leaning on. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. It was a claiming. It was a raw admission of want from a man who had built his entire life on denying it. Martha's breath caught in her chest, the fear, the doubt, the loneliness of the past months. It all crystallized and then shattered. He was not offering her safety. He was not offering her a home. He was offering her himself. He was offering her a life as raw and as dangerous and as real as he was. She did not answer. She did not have to. He had spoken. He had laid his truth at her feet. And she, in her silence, had accepted it. The bond between them was sealed. It was not a bond of law, or paper, or even of soft words. It was a bond of iron, forged in fire and violence. And it was the strongest thing she had ever known. The words hung in the cold, pre-dawn air. "I wanted you to be my woman." Martha had not slept. She had sat in the dark, his buckskin shirt still wrapped around her, the man who had spoken those words a few feet away. A still, watchful shadow. He had not moved, his rifle across his knees, his gaze fixed on the valley. He had laid his heart bare, in the only way he knew how, and now he was guarding it. He was guarding her. His confession was not a soft, Eastern declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, as elemental as the rock beneath them. It was a claiming, and in the long, silent hours of the night, she had claimed him back. She had no words to match his. She had only her presence. She had not flinched. She had not turned away. She had stayed. When the first sick gray light of dawn touched the high peaks, Chaska rose. He moved like a shadow. Not a sound. He did not speak. He did not need to. The intimacy of the night before was a palpable, living thing between them. It was a fragile, new bond, and it was about to be tested. He put his hand on her shoulder and pointed, not down into the valley, but to the east, along the ridge. "They are coming," he said. His voice was flat. Martha's heart leaped. She strained her eyes. She saw nothing but rocks and pines. "How do you know?" "The birds," he said. "They are silent. They should be singing." He was already moving, his actions economical and precise. He was not running. He was preparing. "They will not come from the valley. They know we'd watch. They will follow the high ground. Finch will have a tracker." He grabbed her hand. "We move. Stay low. Do not step on dry branches." He led her, not down, but further up, into a jagged tumble of granite boulders, a place where the mountain had broken, creating a natural fortress. It was a dead end, a small, high plateau, no bigger than a room, with a sheer drop on one side and a narrow, defensible entrance. "We stop here," he said. "We are trapped," she whispered, her voice tight with a new, cold fear. "To run is to be hunted," Chaska said. He checked his rifle. A Winchester. He had a pistol. And his knife. He was heavily outgunned. "Here, they must come to us, one at a time." He looked at her. "Stay against the back wall. No matter what you hear, stay down." He handed her his knife, the long, heavy blade. She looked at it, then at him. I cannot." "You can," he said, his voice hard. "If they pass me, you will use it. You will not be taken." The words struck her with the force of a blow. He was not speaking of her capture. He was speaking of her death. He was giving her the final, terrible choice: freedom or nothing. She took the knife. The handle was warm from his grip. They heard the scrape of a boot on rock. Then a voice, Alistair Finch's voice, high and reedy with triumph. "He is in there, I know it, Marshal. He has trapped himself." Another voice, deeper, heavier with authority. "Mr. Chaska, this is United States Marshal Davies. I have a warrant for your arrest, for assault, and for the abduction of Miss Martha. Come out with your hands in the air. The woman is to be released, unharmed." Abduction. The word was a lie, a piece of paper Finch was using as a weapon. Chaska did not answer. He was a statue, pressed against the rock at the narrow entrance, his rifle ready. "Ma'am," the marshal's voice called out. "Miss Martha, can you hear me? Are you in there? Are you being held against your will?" This was it. This was the true choice. The law, her world, was calling for her. They were offering her a way out. All she had to do was walk out and say she was a victim. Chaska would be hanged, but she would be safe. She looked at Chaska. He was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the entrance. He was leaving the choice to her. Again. But this time, the cost was his life. Martha stood up. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper. It was a shout, raw and clear, echoing off the rocks. "Marshal, I am not being held. I am here by my own choice." There was a stunned silence. Finch's voice exploded in a shriek. "She is lying. He has bewitched her. He has threatened her, Marshal. Do your duty." "Ma'am, I do not think you understand the situation." Marshal Davies called, his voice harder now. "You are consorting with a known fugitive. That is a crime. Come out now, and I will speak for you." "He is not a fugitive," Martha shouted back, her fear replaced by a towering, cold rage. "He protected me, the men you are with. He is the one who assaulted me. He tried to take me by force." "That is a lie," Finch screamed. "A slander, Marshal. She has lost her mind. She is a savage's woman now. You must retrieve her. Open fire." "I will not open fire on a civilian woman," the Marshal said, his voice tight with frustration. "I am sending a man in to get you, ma'am, for your own good." "Stay back," Martha yelled. "He will not harm you if you stay back." "That is enough," the Marshal said. "We are coming in." A man, one of the posse, appeared at the narrow entrance. He was holding a rifle, his face set. "Just the woman," he said, not looking at Chaska. "Just step aside, Chief." Chaska did not move. The man took one more step. Chaska's rifle fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The man cried out, not in pain but in surprise, as the rifle was shot from his hands, his fingers stinging. He stumbled back, unarmed. "The next shot will not be a warning." Chaska's voice boomed, a low, powerful sound. "Fire!" Finch screamed. "Fire! You fools! He is a killer!" The world exploded. Bullets slammed into the rocks, chipping stone, whining, ricocheting in their small space. Martha screamed and flattened herself against the back wall as Chaska had ordered. Chaska was not there. He was a blur, firing, moving, firing again. He was not a man. He was a part of the rock. He was fighting with a cold, contained fury. He was protecting his home. He was protecting her. "There is another way," she heard Finch yell. "Go around above him." Chaska's head snapped up. He looked at the high wall above them. It was sheer, but not impossible. "Martha," he barked. He did not look at her. His eyes were on the entrance, his pistol now in his hand. "The high rock to your right, watch the high rock." She understood. She was not a victim to be protected. She was a partner. She scrambled, the knife still in her hand, and pressed herself into a corner where she could see the lip of the overhang. She was his eyes. The firing from the front lessened, a clear diversion. Martha held her breath. She watched the rock, A shadow, a hand, a man's face, bearded, peered over the edge. He was trying to get a clear shot down into their fortress. "Now!" Martha screamed. "Above you, right?" Chaska did not hesitate. He did not look. He trusted her. He turned and fired his rifle upward, blindly. 2 shots, 3, a cry of pain. The man's rifle clattered down the rocks, and he disappeared. "He is hit!" she yelled, a wild, savage triumph in her voice. From the front, the marshal's voice, "That's enough. Hold your fire. Hold your fire." I said. The shooting stopped. The silence was ringing. "Mr. Finch," the marshal said, his voice deadly. "You said he was one man. He is a damned army. You said she was a victim. She is fighting with him. I have 2 men wounded. I will not lose a man for your family squabble. We are pulling back." "No," Finch was apoplectic. "You cannot. She is a white woman. He is a... You are a coward. I am a marshal, and I am done here." There was the sound of men pulling back, of boots on gravel, the sound of a man groaning in pain. They were leaving. Martha sank against the rock, her legs shaking so hard she could not stand. They had won. They had won. Chaska did not relax. He was still listening, his body rigid. He was watching the entrance. "It is not over," he whispered. "But they are leaving," she said. "The marshal is leaving." He said, "He is not." He meant Finch. A single shot rang out, not from the entrance, from the side, from a small crack in the rock she had not even seen. Chaska cried out. It was not a yell. It was a sharp, guttural sound, a sound of profound surprise. He staggered. He looked down at his chest. A dark, wet stain was spreading over his shirt, high on his right side. He fired his pistol into the crack in the rock. There was a scream, a thin, reedy sound, and the sound of a body falling. "Finch!" Chaska stayed on his feet for a long second. He looked at Martha. His face was not in pain. It was surprised. He had guarded against the posse. He had not seen the snake in the grass. He fell. He did not collapse. He simply folded, his back sliding down the rock, until he was sitting, his rifle clattering from his grasp. "Chaska!" she screamed. She scrambled to him, the knife falling from her hand. He was pale, his skin turning a waxy gray. The blood was pumping from the wound. Too much, too fast. "You are safe," he whispered. His eyes were already losing focus. He was looking at her, but he was seeing something else. "No," she said, her voice a desperate, animal sob. "No, you cannot leave me." She pressed her hands to the wound, but the blood, his life, ran hot between her fingers. She looked at him, this man who was her entire world, this man who was the rock and the mountain and the pine, and he was dying. She realized, in that moment of absolute, searing clarity, that her love for him was not a feeling. It was not a choice. It was her. It was the only thing that mattered. It was her strength, and she would not let him go. She had to save him. She had to fight. He had fought for her freedom. Now, she would fight for his life. She ripped a strip from her petticoat, her hands no longer shaking. They were a cook's hands. They were a survivor's hands. They were strong. "You will not die," she said. Not to him, but to the land, to the sky, to whatever God was listening. "I will not let you." The world narrowed to the sound of Chaska's breathing, a ragged, wet sound that tore at Martha's soul. The shot had come from the crack in the rocks, a coward's shot, and Alistair Finch's dying scream was still echoing in the high canyon. But he had left his mark. The victory was poison. "Chaska!" she said, her voice low and fierce. She pressed the wadded strip of her petticoat against the wound. It was high on his right side, near the shoulder, but the blood was dark and heavy, and there was too much of it. It soaked the cloth instantly. He looked at her. His eyes were filmed with pain, but he was still there. He was fighting. "Finch," he whispered. "He is gone," she said, her voice shaking. "I heard him fall. He is gone. Now it is just us." She tore another strip of cloth, thicker this time, and packed it against the first. She had to stop the bleeding. She had seen men bleed on the ranch. A cut from a bad branding, a fall from a horse. She had never seen this. This was a hole, a terrible, final hole. "You have to get up," she said. She was not asking. She was commanding. "You have to help me. I cannot carry you." He tried. He gritted his teeth, his hand going to the rock, and he pushed. A low, terrible sound tore from his throat, and he slumped back, his head lolling. His eyes closed. "No," she said, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "No, you do not leave me." She slapped his face. It was not a hard slap, but it was a desperate one. "Chaska, wake up!" His eyes flickered open. The fire was almost gone. "The horse," he breathed. "My horse." "It is here. He is here. Can you whistle?" He shook his head, a tiny, pained movement. She put her fingers to her mouth, the way she had seen the cowboys do, and blew. A thin, reedy sound came out. It was pathetic. She tried again, harder, a sharp, piercing whistle. They waited. The silence was absolute. Nothing. "Again," he whispered, his eyes closed. She whistled again, putting all of her fear and rage into it. A moment later, a soft nicker answered from below the rocks. "The Appaloosa." He was waiting. "Good," she said, her mind racing. She was a cook. She knew logistics. She had to move a heavy, inert weight from one place to another. She had to get him out of this rock trap and onto that horse. "We are going," she said. She looped her arm under his left shoulder. "The good side. Help me. On your feet. Now." She pulled. He was all dead weight. It was like trying to lift a felled tree. "Chaska, you must fight. You are a warrior. Fight." The words seemed to reach him. He groaned, and this time, he pushed. He got one foot under him. Martha pulled, her muscles screaming, her back on fire. He was half standing, half leaning on her, a staggering, impossible burden. He was tall, and his weight bore her down. "One step," she commanded, her voice sobbing with the effort. "Now." They moved. A grotesque, lurching dance. He was not walking, he was dragging a leg. She was his crutch, his will. His blood was soaking her dress, warm and sticky against her skin. Every step was an agony. They reached the narrow entrance of the rock fort. It was a drop of 3 feet to the trail below. "I cannot jump," he breathed, his weight failing. "You will not," she said. She eased him to the ground, his back against the rock. "Wait." She scrambled down the drop, her hands raw. She ran to the Appaloosa. The horse shied, his eyes wide, smelling the blood and the gunfire. "Easy," she murmured, her voice gentle. "Easy, boy. I am with him. I am with Chaska. We need you." She grabbed the reins and led the horse to the base of the rock. "Here," she called up. "I am here. You have to slide." She looked up. He was a shadow against the sky, slumped and broken. He looked down at her. He knew what she was asking. It might kill him. "Now, Martha," he said, his voice a thread. He was giving his last bit of strength, his trust, to her. He pushed off. He fell more than slid, landing in a heap in the dust and rocks at her feet. A terrible, choked cry was ripped from him. He lay still. For one horrible second, she thought the fall had finished him. "Chaska," she whispered. He moved, just a hand, twitching. He was alive. She had to get him on the horse. It was an impossible task. She looked at the man, at the horse. She could not lift him. She was strong. but she was not that strong. "The rock," she said, more to herself than to him. She half-dragged, half-rolled him to a tall boulder next to the trail. It was a mounting block. It was her only chance. "Chaska, you have to help," she pleaded, tears of frustration and terror streaming down her face, cutting paths in the dust and blood. "I cannot lift you. You have to climb." She pulled him up, getting him to a sitting position against the boulder. He was barely conscious. "Just your leg," she said. "Give me your good leg." She brought the horse alongside, so close it was touching him. She took his left foot and lifted it, trying to get it into the stirrup. His leg was like lead. "Lift," she commanded. "Lift." He grunted. He tried. His foot found the stirrup. "Now," she said. Pull with your arms. I will push." She put her shoulder under his armpit. She wrapped her arms around his waist. She pulled the saddle horn, got his left hand onto it. "Pull, Chaska, pull for your life." She pushed. He pulled. It was a desperate, ugly, failing scramble. He slipped. She caught him. His blood was on her face, in her mouth. She tasted it. It was iron and salt. "Again!" she screamed. She pushed with everything she had, a deep, animal groan tearing from her. He pulled. He got a knee onto the saddle. He was halfway up, draped over the horse like a fresh kill. "It is enough," he breathed. "It is not," she said. She climbed the boulder herself. She stood on it, level with the saddle. She grabbed him, pushing, pulling, riding him, until he was slumped forward, his chest on the horse's neck. She swung her own leg over, seating herself behind him, caging his broken body with her own. She grabbed the reins. His horse, loyal, trained, stood like a rock. "Where?" she asked, her voice a dry rasp. "Where do I go? I do not know this land." He was fading fast. His head lolled back against her shoulder. His skin was cold. "Chaska, where?" He licked his lips. He raised a trembling hand, pointing not at a trail, but at a distant, notched peak, one she had never seen. "The valley of the quiet stone," he whispered. "My home." His hand fell. He was unconscious. She was alone. She had a dying man in her arms, and her only guide was a whispered name and a distant mountain peak. She nudged the horse. "Go," she said. "Take us home." The horse, as if it understood, began to walk. It picked its way carefully, surely down the rocky trail, away from the place of death. The journey was a blur. It was a waking nightmare. Martha's world was the man in front of her. She held him. She held his life. Her arms ached, then went numb, then ached again. She could feel the faint, shallow rise and fall of his breathing against her. Sometimes he would groan, a low, pained sound that cut her to the quick. She rode for hours. The sun beat down. She had no water. She had no food. Her entire being was focused on one thing, keeping him on the horse, keeping him alive. She did not know the trails. She only knew the peak. She kept it in sight, guiding the horse through canyons, across dry riverbeds, through thickets of pine. The horse seemed to know. It moved with a purpose that gave her hope. Late in the afternoon, when she thought she could go no further, that she would fall from the horse and they would both die there, the horse turned into a canyon she had not seen. It was a crack in the rock, hidden by a curtain of ancient junipers. The trail inside was narrow, and it opened into a place of impossible, secret beauty. It was a small, high valley, no more than a mile long, with a floor of green grass and a stream of clear, cold water. At the far end, tucked under the cliff, was a small lodge, built of stone and timber. It was hidden. It was safe. It was home. She rode to the lodge. She slid off the horse. her legs collapsing under her. She had no strength left. She lay on the grass for a long moment, the earth cool beneath her. But Chaska was still on the horse. He was still bleeding. She forced herself up. She pulled him from the saddle. He fell into her arms, a dead weight. She dragged him, inch by painful inch, across the grass and into the lodge. Inside, it was cool and dark. It was one room, clean, smelling of pine and herbs. There were furs on a raised bed, a stone hearth. It was his place. She dragged him to the furs and laid him down. He was so pale. His breathing was so shallow. She had gotten him to safety, but the battle was not over. The wound was still bleeding. The fever was already beginning, a faint, dry heat on his skin. She had saved him from the mountain. Now she had to save him from himself, from the death that was inside him. Her love had been tested by violence. Now it would be tested by the long, quiet fight against the dark. The lodge was a pocket of silence. Outside, the wind whispered through the high pines. But inside, the thick stone walls held a stillness, broken only by the sound of Chaska's ragged, shallow breathing. Martha moved. Exhaustion was a poison in her limbs, a heavy, dull ache, but she ignored it. To rest was to let him die. She laid him flat on the bed of furs. His face was waxy, his skin already cooling, clammy to the touch. The makeshift bandage on his chest was a sodden, dark red ruin. She had to stop the bleeding, and she had to clean the wound. First, fire. She looked at the stone hearth. It was clean, laid with dry tinder, a small stack of wood beside it. He had left it ready. She found his flint and steel in a pouch on the wall. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely strike a spark. She closed her eyes. She pictured the kitchen stove. She thought of the wind on the prairie. She was a survivor. Her hands steadied. She struck the steel. A spark caught. She blew on it, gently, patiently, until a small, welcome flame licked at the tinder. She added wood, fire. It was life. Next, water. She took a skin pouch from the wall and ran to the stream. The water was fast and so cold it hurt her hands. She filled the skin and ran back. She found a small iron pot near the hearth. She filled it and set it in the flames to boil. Now, the wound. She knelt beside him. She had to see it. She took his knife, the one he had given her, and with a hand that did not tremble, she cut away the bloody, stiff buckskin of his shirt. The wound was ugly. It was a ragged hole. High on his chest, near the collarbone, it was still weeping blood. She pressed her hand against it. Hard. He did not move. He was too far gone. The bullet, was it still in him? She felt gently around the wound. She could not tell. She looked at his back. There was no exit. It was inside him. It had to come out. She looked at the knife in her hand. She looked at the fire. She thought of her father's kitchen, of the butcher cleaning a chicken. She was a cook. She knew how to handle a blade. She held the knife in the fire until the tip glowed red. She took a deep breath. She pressed the hot blade to the edges of the wound. The smell of seared flesh filled the small lodge. He did not cry out. He only shuddered. A deep, convulsive movement, and a low sound escaped his lips. She had stopped the bleeding, but the bullet was still there. A piece of lead, a piece of Finch's poison, buried deep in his strength. She had to probe for it. She had no tools, only her fingers. She washed her hands in the boiling water, scrubbing them with a harsh soap she found. She knelt again. "Chaska, forgive me," she whispered. She pushed her fingers into the wound. It was a violation. It was an act of terrible intimacy. She felt the muscle, the gristle, the hard barrier of bone. He groaned, a sound from deep in his chest, and his body arched in a silent scream, even in his unconsciousness. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not stop. She had to find it. She probed, her fingers searching, until she felt it. A small, hard lump lodged against the bone. She could not get it. Her fingers were not strong enough. She looked around the lodge. Frantic, she saw his pouches, his tools. She found a pair of small, strong pliers, used for mending traps. She held them in the fire until they were clean. She went back. She said, "I am here. I will not let you go." She pushed the pliers into the wound. She found the lead. She gripped it. She pulled. It would not budge. It was lodged. She had to twist, to pull. His body went rigid. A terrible, strangled sound came from his throat. And it was free. She pulled it out. A small, deformed piece of metal, dark with his blood. She threw it into the fire. He was still breathing. It was a thread, but it was there. She looked around the lodge. His life was here. He was a man who lived prepared. On a shelf, there were small, dried bundles, herbs. She recognized some. Yarrow, to stop bleeding. Willow bark, for fever. She crushed the yarrow and a plant she did not know. A broad, fuzzy leaf in her hands. She packed the green, fragrant mash into the wound. She bound it tightly with the last clean strips of her clothing. She had done all she could. The rest was up to the fever. And to him. The night was the first test. The fever came, as she knew it would. His skin, once cold, turned to fire. He began to shake. He thrashed, his strong body fighting an invisible enemy. He cried out, not in English, but in the language of his people. It was a torrent of words, fast and angry, then soft and grieving. He was reliving the fight. He was reliving the loss of his lands. He was seeing ghosts. Martha did not sleep. She sat beside him. She was his anchor. She dipped cloths in the cold stream water and bathed his face, his chest. She held his hand. She spoke to him. She said, "I am Martha. I am here. You are not alone. You are in the valley of the quiet stone. You are home. Come back to me." He did not hear her. He was burning. He was fighting for his life in a world of shadows. For 2 days, he did not wake. He was in the fire. Martha became a machine. She kept the fire in the hearth going. She boiled water. She hunted in his lodge for food. She found dried meat, tough as wood, and a small sack of cornmeal. She made a thin broth. She made a thin gruel. She made a thin, weak porridge. She would lift his head that was so heavy, and force the water between his cracked lips. He would choke, but he would swallow. She kept him alive, drop by drop. On the 3rd night, the fever reached its crisis. He was rigid, his body arched, a fine tremor running through him. His breathing was so shallow she could barely see his chest move. She thought he was gone. She put her head to his chest and heard the faint, fluttering beat of his heart. It was the sound of a trapped bird. This was the end. He was dying. She lay down beside him on the furs. She did not cry. She was beyond tears. She put her arms around him, holding his hot, trembling body against hers. She said, "You cannot go. You are a warrior. You are the mountain. You are the stone. You told me I was weak. Look at me. I am strong. Stay with me. Be my strength. I have never asked for anything. I am asking you. Stay." She spoke for hours. She told him about Philadelphia. She told him about the airless rooms, the silent afternoons. She told him about her dream of freedom. She told him about the first time she saw him, by the pine tree. She told him he was the first real thing she had ever seen. She talked until her voice was a raw whisper. She held him. She willed her life into him. She would not let him go. She did not know when she fell asleep. She woke with a start. The lodge was cold. The fire was embers. And the silence was different. It was not the silence of fever. It was the silence of peace. She looked at him. His face was pale, bathed in a film of sweat. He was not burning. The fever had broken. He was still. His eyes were open. He was looking at her. He was weak, so weak, but he was there. The fire was gone. He was himself. "Martha," he whispered. His voice was a dry scratch. She sobbed. It was a single, tearing sound. She scrambled up, her hands going to his face. "You are back," she said. "You are back." "Water," he said. She brought him the skin. She lifted his head gently, and he drank. He drank for a long time. He sighed and lay back. His eyes never left her face. He looked at her torn, blood-stained dress, at her face, streaked with soot and tears, at her matted hair. He raised his hand, his good hand, slowly, with great effort. He touched her cheek. "You fought," he said. "We fought," she said, her voice thick. "You are not an easy patient." A faint, tiny spark lit his eyes. It was the humor she had seen so rarely. "You are a bad nurse," he whispered. "You are too loud." She laughed, a sound that was half a sob. She laid her cheek against his hand. "Rest," she said. "I will make you broth." The healing was slow. It was a new kind of battle. He was a man of action, of strength, and he was now as weak as a newborn. He was completely dependent on her. She hunted for him, finding the snares he had set, and she was clumsy. But she learned. She found a rabbit in one. She cooked for him, the broth getting thicker, the meat more solid, as his strength returned. She bathed him. She changed his bandages. The wound raw and red, but clean. It was healing. She saw the hard, roped muscles of his body, the old scars, and now the new one, the one she had given him. He watched her. He had never been cared for like this. He had never been this weak, this vulnerable, in front of anyone. He saw her, not as an Eastern woman, not as a burden, but as she was. He saw her strength, a deep, quiet well that did not run dry. He saw her tenderness, a thing he had never known. He saw her competence, the way she'd learned the snares, the way she'd managed the fire, the way she moved around his lodge as if she belonged there. She did belong there. They talked, in the long, quiet afternoons. As his strength returned, they spoke. He told her about the valley. It was a sacred place, a place his people had used for healing, for refuge. It was his last sanctuary. He told her of his fight, not against her people, but against the hunger, the force that came with the paper and the fences, that devoured the land. She told him of her cage, of the smallness, of her own hunger, for a life that meant something. They learned each other. They realized that their future could not be in her world, or even in the world he had lost. It had to be here. In this hidden place, they were fugitives. They were free. They were alone. Together. One evening, weeks later, he was strong enough to walk. He was still lean, his face gaunt, but the strength was pouring back into him. He leaned on her, and they walked from the lodge to the stream. The sun was setting, and it lit the high cliffs, the quiet stone, with a deep, rose-colored fire. They sat by the water. The silence was comfortable now, a shared blanket. He had been quiet all day, a thoughtful, deep stillness. He took her hand. Her hand was hard now, calloused from the snares and the knife and the fire. It was not the hand of a Philadelphia woman. "The night on the ridge," he said, his voice stronger now, deep. "I spoke words. I was a man in fear. I was afraid to lose you." She looked at him. "I heard you, Chaska." "Today," he said, "I am not that man. I am not in fear." He reached down, not into his pouch, but into the clear, cold water of the stream. He pulled out a small stone. It was a simple, gray stone, worn smooth by the water. It was plain, and solid, and real. "In my world," he said, his voice low, "a man builds a home. He builds it of stone, for the foundation. He builds it of wood, for the walls. He brings the fire, for the heart. He brings the water for the life. He looked from the lodge, to the fire smoking in the hearth, to the stream running at their feet. He looked at her. He pressed the smooth, cool stone into her palm. "My lodge is built," he said. "The fire is lit. The water is here. But I have no foundation. You are my foundation, Martha. You are my home. Be my quiet stone." It was not a question. It was a statement, like his first one. But it was not a claiming. It was an offering. He was offering her his life, his home, his future. He was asking her to be the center of it. She closed her hand around the stone. It was heavy. It was real. It was the truest thing she had ever held. She looked at his face, the face she had brought back from the shadows. She saw the man, the warrior, the mountains, and the home she had been running toward her entire life. "I have been running for so long," she said, her voice quiet. "I thought I was running to a place. I was not. I was running to you." She put her other hand over his, pressing the stone between their palms. "I am not running anymore. I am home." The stone was in her pocket. It was a smooth, gray river stone, and it was her only dowry. It was the foundation of her new life, a solid, tangible piece of his promise. In the days that followed their commitment, as Chaska's wound finished healing, knitting new, raw skin over the scarred muscle, the world changed. The valley, once a secret refuge, became their universe. The high granite walls were not a prison. They were a boundary, protecting them from a world of paper laws and black powder. They were fugitives. They were free. Life, which had been a series of violent, breathless crises, settled into a rhythm. It was the rhythm of the sun, and the stream, and the wind in the high pines. It was a life of work, but it was a different kind of work from the back-breaking, thankless toil of the ranch. This work was for them. It was the work of living. Martha had come west to be a cook. She learned, in that first autumn, that she had never truly cooked at all. In Philadelphia, she had commanded ingredients. At the ranch, she had wrestled with bulk supplies, sacks of flour and barrels of salt pork. Here, her kitchen was the valley floor. Her pantry was the forest. Her stove was the open fire. Chaska was her teacher, the intimacy that had been forged in the fever, in the desperate fight for his life, softened into a new kind of closeness. It was the quiet, patient closeness of shared tasks. He was a man of few words, and he taught her in the same way. He taught her to see. He would take her hand, his own hand hard and scarred, and lead her to a patch of scrubby-looking plants. He would crush a leaf. "This," he would say, "is for the meat. It makes it sweet." "Sage," he would point to another, a feathery green plant. "This you dry, for the cough." He would stop by a bush with bright, waxy red berries. "This is a lie. It is pretty. It will stop your heart." She learned. She was a cook, and her mind was built to remember flavors, textures, and properties. She learned the mushrooms that were safe, the roots that were sweet when roasted in the embers. She learned to find the wild onions by the stream, to harvest the sharp, piney needles of the juniper. She learned the difference between the bark that healed a fever and the berry that delivered a final sleep. Her hands, which had killed the snake, learned to be gentle. They learned to forage, to gather, to see the bounty in a land that had once seemed to her only empty and harsh. He taught her to hunt, not with the rifle. The sound was too great, a violation of their quiet valley. And ammunition was more precious than gold. He taught her the way of the snare. He showed her how to read the faint paths the rabbits made in the tall grass. He showed her how to tie the knot, a small, clever loop of sinew, how to balance the stick, how to use the sapling's own tension. The first time she caught one, she cried. She found the rabbit in the morning, its struggle over, its neck broken. It was a small, soft, gray thing. It was a life she had taken. Chaska stood behind her. He did not comfort her. He did not judge her. He waited. She wiped her eyes on her sleeve. She looked at the rabbit. She thought of the long, cold winter that was coming. She thought of Chaska, his body thin from the fever, needing strength. She took the knife from her belt, the one he had given her. "You will show me," she said, her voice hard, "how to skin it. We will not waste any part." He nodded. A single, slow movement. He saw the iron in her. He saw his own practicality, his own respect for the bargain of life. He showed her how to make the cuts, clean and sure. He showed her how to scrape the pelt, how to stretch it on a small frame of green wood. He showed her how to clean the meat. That night, she made a stew, rich with wild onion and sage and the rabbit she herself had provided. It was the best meal she had ever made. She was no longer a cook. She was a provider. She was integrating. While she learned the valley floor, Chaska was its guardian. He was no longer the lone warrior, fighting for a lost past. He was a husband, protecting a living future. He would leave, sometimes for a day, sometimes for 3. He would melt into the rocks at dawn, his rifle in his hand, his horse moving like a ghost. The first time he left, Martha felt a return of the old, cold panic. The lodge was too quiet. The valley was too big. She was alone, a white woman, an outlaw. The world, the one with the marshals and laws, could be just over the ridge. She found herself watching the narrow entrance to the valley, her heart stopping at every snap of a twig, every cry of a hawk. She forced herself to work. She would not be a waiting, fearful woman. She was the mistress of this home. She took every fur, every blanket from the lodge and beat them, airing them in the sharp, clean sunlight. She scrubbed the stone floor. She organized his tools. She took the small, lopsided clay bowl she had made and filled it with dried yarrow. She imposed her own order, her own sense of domesticity, on his wild, male refuge. She was not just passing time. She was claiming her home. She was making a space for him to return to. When he appeared at the tree line, as silent as the dusk, her heart did not leap with fear. It settled. He walked into the lodge. He stopped. He looked at the clean floor. He saw his knives, oiled and laid in a neat row. He saw her bowl of herbs on the shelf. He looked at her, her face smudged with soot, her hair tied back with a strip of leather. He did not thank her. He did not praise her. He simply unslung the young buck from his shoulders. "We have meat for the winter," he said. He sat by the fire, watching her as she moved. "The world has forgotten us," he said, his voice low. She paused, a cutting knife in her hand. "What do you mean?" "I went to the ridges above the trading post. I listened. The marshal, Davies, he believes you are dead. He believes Finch took you, and that I killed Finch, and that I vanished. He is not looking for you. He is not looking for me. They were ghosts. The law had written them off. Alistair Finch had, in his final, grasping act of malice, given them their freedom." Martha sat down, the weight of this news settling on her. There was no going back. There was nothing to go back to. Her old life was not just abandoned. It was finished. She was, in the eyes of the world, dead. She looked at Chaska, at his strong face in the firelight. She looked at the lodge, her home. "Good," she said, a fierce, deep joy in her heart. "Let them think we are dead." The coming winter was their true enemy now. It was the great test. They worked as a team. He hunted. She preserved. She had a cook's knowledge of time and heat. She adapted it. She cut the venison into thin, clean strips. He built her a smoking rack. She learned to use the cool, aromatic smoke of juniper and alder, smoking the meat until it was hard and dark and would last for months. She foraged, gathering the last of the autumn berries. She pounded them with the rendered fat from the buck, mixing in crushed, roasted nuts. She shaped them into small, hard cakes, just as he showed her. It was his people's food. It was journey food. It was survival. She was no longer an Eastern woman. The last traces of Philadelphia had been burned away by the sun, scoured by the wind, and washed clean by the stream. Her hands were hard, scarred, and competent. Her body, once bound by corsets, was lean and strong. She could walk for miles. She could read the sky. She knew the voice of the wind, when it carried the promise of rain, and when it carried the sharp, cold bite of the first snow. She had integrated. She had not become one of his people. She had not become a savage. As Finch had shrieked, she had become something new. She was a woman of the mountains. She was Chaska's woman. He saw the change. He saw the woman who had once been a burden, a piece of the world he despised. He now saw a partner, a woman as strong as the stone he had given her. He, too, had changed. The hard, cold anger that had driven him for so long, the grief for his lost past, had eased. He still guarded the land, his ancestral land, but he was no longer a lonely ghost. He was guarding his home. He was guarding his family. One night, the first true snow of the high country began to fall. It was not a storm, but a quiet, determined whisper of flakes, blanketing the valley in white. Their work was done. The meat was hung. The firewood was stacked. The lodge was warm. They sat by the fire. He was mending a snare. She was stitching a patch onto his old shirt, her stitches small and neat, a last remnant of her old world. The silence was full. She looked at him, at the way the firelight caught the high planes of his face. She put her hand on her own belly, a small, quiet gesture. She had not told him yet. The work had been too important, but she knew. Her body, which had become so attuned to the rhythms of the valley, was now attuned to a new rhythm, a new life growing inside her. He looked up, his hand still. He had seen the gesture. His eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, missed nothing. He looked at her hand, at her belly. He did not ask. He did not need to. He put down the snare. He came to her, kneeling on the furs beside her. He did not speak. He simply placed his large, warm hand over hers, holding it against her, against the new life they had made. They were a foundation. They were a family. They were ready for the winter. The hand he placed over hers was a map of their life. It was scarred, calloused, and strong. It was the hand that had steadied a mule in a hailstorm, the hand that had struck down two men, the hand that had held a smooth river stone. It rested now on her belly, a claim, a promise, a circle of warmth against the cold. The first snow was a blessing. It was a wall, a white curtain that sealed the narrow entrance to their valley. The world of marshals and black-suited men was gone, buried under a deep, quiet blanket. They were ghosts, as he had said. The valley was their afterlife, a heaven made of rock and pine and hard work. Winter was not a hardship. It was a long, quiet breath. The lodge, which had been Chaska's stark, male refuge, softened. It became a home. Martha's presence filled it. She was a cook, and the heart of a home, she knew, was the fire. She kept it burning, a constant, low, glowing companion. The smell of wood smoke and juniper, which had once been the smell of the wild, was now the smell of safety. Chaska's strength returned fully. The winter was his time to mend, not just his body, but his tools. He would sit for hours by the fire, the light playing on his high cheekbones, his hands never still. He scraped and treated the deer hides until they were supple as cloth. He sharpened his knives. He carved a small, intricate figure for the baby, a bird with outstretched wings, from a piece of pine. He worked in a deep, contented silence. Martha sewed. Her hands, now as tough as his, learned a new, finer skill. She took the soft, smoked hides and, using an awl and sinew, she stitched them. She made a lining for the lodge door to keep out the drafts. She made a pair of small, soft moccasins, lining them with the fur of the rabbit she had snared. She was nesting. She was preparing. They talked. The long, dark nights invited it. He told her stories, not of war, but of the land. He told her the names his people had for the stars that wheeled overhead, the patterns they saw, the stories of the coyote who tricked the moon. He taught her his language, a word at a time, the word for water, the word for stone, the word for home. She told him of Philadelphia. She spoke of the hard, gray rain, the endless clatter of wagons on cobblestone. She spoke of her mother, a quiet woman who had faded in a dark parlor. She spoke of her father, a man of paper and anger. She found, in the telling, that those people were no longer real. They were the ghosts. He, this man beside her, was the only real thing. He would listen, his head tilted, his eyes on the fire. He was a man who understood cages. "You were a bird in a box," he said one night, his voice low. "Your wings, they were not broken. They were just folded." She looked at her hands, sewing the leather. "They are not folded anymore," she said. The baby grew. Her body, lean and hard, changed. Chaska cared for her with a quiet, intense focus. He would hunt, and always. The tenderest part of the meat was for her. He would rise in the cold dark to add wood to the fire, so she would not wake to a cold lodge. He would rub her back when it ached. He never spoke of love. He simply lived it. He was her foundation, and she was his. The spring was a violent birth. The valley, locked in ice, exploded. The stream became a brown, roaring torrent. The snow melted with a rush, and the ground, frozen and hard, gave way to a sudden, desperate carpet of green. The world was coming alive again, and so was their child. It began one night when a warm wind, the first real wind of spring, was whistling down the canyon. Martha's body was seized by a pain so deep, so elemental, it took her breath. Chaska was at her side in an instant. His face was not afraid. It was calm, alert, and present. This was just another part of the land, another part of the rhythm. He had seen it. He knew it. He built up the fire until the lodge was warm. He boiled water. He had bundles of dried herbs ready, herbs his mother had taught his sister to use. He made a tea. "Drink," he said. She was in the fire. The pain was a wave, lifting her, crushing her. She was terrified. "I cannot," she gasped, her hands gripping the furs. "You can," he said. He did not leave her side. He was not a nervous, pacing man. He was a rock. He knelt before her. He took her hands. "You are Martha. You are my quiet stone. You are the strongest woman I have ever known. Breathe, fight, bring me my son." He was her anchor. She focused on his face, his dark, calm eyes. She held his hands, crushing them with a strength she did not know she possessed. He did not flinch. He just held her. He was the foundation. She fought all night. She was the woman who had crossed a continent, who had faced a rattlesnake, who had pulled a dying man onto a horse. This was her last battle, the battle for life. At dawn, as the first light hit the high peaks, a new cry joined the sound of the stream. It was a thin, reedy, powerful wail. It was a boy. Chaska cut the cord with his knife. He cleaned the baby, his large, scarred hands impossibly gentle. He wrapped the child in a soft, clean hide and placed him in Martha's arms. She was exhausted, hollowed out, but she was flooded with a love so fierce it was a new kind of pain. She looked at the small, perfect, red face. He had a thatch of dark hair. He had her mouth and his father's strong brow. Chaska sat beside her, his hand on her hair. He looked at his son, a new territory, a new map. His eyes, which had always watched the horizon for enemies, finally came to rest. He was a man who had fought to protect the past. He was now looking at the future. His line, which he had thought was the last, was not. It was the first. "What is his name?" she whispered. Chaska thought for a moment. He touched the boy's cheek. "He was born of the stone and the fire. He is the first. We will call him Asher," he said, a name from her world, but it meant strong, blessed, a new beginning. Time in the valley was measured by seasons and by the growth of the boy. Asher was a child of two worlds and of none. He was a child of the valley. He had his father's silent, fluid grace. Before he was 5, he could move through the trees without a sound. He had his mother's bright, curious mind. Martha taught him to read. Her only book was a small volume of Shakespeare she had hidden in her trunk, a thing she had kept secret, her one last piece of the old world. She and Asher sat by the fire, his dark head bent over the page. He learned the sounds, the letters, the words. He learned of kings and faraway seas, and men who spoke their hearts in words like music. Chaska taught him the land. He taught him the language of the hawk. He taught him which way the wind would blow by the feel of the air on his skin. He taught him to listen, to be still, to be a part of the rock and the tree. One afternoon, Martha watched from the lodge. Chaska and Asher, now 8 years old, were stalking a ground squirrel by the stream. They were two shadows, moving in perfect, silent unison. Then Asher, seeing the squirrel dive into its hole, stood up, dusted off his buckskin leggings, turned to his mother, and called out, in clear, precise English, "Mother, may I have a sweet cake when I'm done?" Martha laughed, a full, free sound that echoed in the valley. Chaska looked over at her, a rare, small smile touching his own lips. This was their son, a warrior who could quote Shakespeare, a hunter who asked politely for dessert. He was not of her world. He was not of Chaska's. He was the first of their own. 2 years later, a girl was born. This time, it was easy. The spring was gentle. They named her Sarah. She was her mother's daughter, with brown hair and a will of iron, but she had her father's watchful eyes. The valley was a full, rich world. Martha planted a garden. Chaska had helped her clear a small patch by the stream. She had found seeds in the ruined wagon, packets of beans and squash and corn. She planted them, a small, stubborn piece of her old life, and they grew. She was a cook, and she needed her kitchen. Years passed. The children were young adults. Asher was tall, a perfect blend of his parents, with his father's quiet strength and his mother's ready wit. Sarah was the valley's queen, as wild and as competent as the land itself. The world outside had forgotten them. One time, and only one time, the outside world had touched them. Chaska had been on the high ridge. He had come back, his face grim. "What is it?" Martha had asked, her heart cold. "Men," he said. "Riders, with blue coats, soldiers. They are in the next valley. They are hunting." They had hunted for 2 weeks. Martha and Chaska had kept the children in the valley. They did not light a fire. They ate the cold, dried meat. They waited. Chaska was a shadow on the ridge, watching. But the soldiers, the law, the world, they were not looking for ghosts. They were looking for a new fight, a new enemy. They passed by. They never saw the narrow, hidden entrance. They never saw the small, green, impossible valley. The world had moved on. They were truly, finally, safe. The scene that marked their final peace was an evening in late summer. 20 years had passed since the day on the mountain. Martha and Chaska sat by the stream, in the same spot where he had given her the stone. The stone was in a leather pouch around her neck. She was no longer the young, desperate woman. Her hair was threaded with gray. Her face was a map of the sun and the wind. She was beautiful, a beauty carved from strength. Chaska, beside her, was no longer the angry, grieving warrior. His face was calm. The lines around his eyes were from watching his children, not from watching for enemies. He was a man at peace. Their children, Asher and Sarah, were at the far end of the valley, racing the 2 horses Chaska had caught and tamed for them. Their laughter, clear and free, was the only sound besides the water and the wind. They were not oppressed. They were not bound by paper laws or small rooms. They were, quite simply, free. Martha looked at them. She looked at this impossible life she had built. She had come west to cook, to find a small, safe life. She had found something else. She had found a war. She had found a man. She had found herself. She reached out and touched the puckered, white scar on Chaska's chest. It was the mark of their beginning. He covered her hand with his, lacing his fingers through hers. "You were wrong," she said, her voice quiet. He turned to her, his dark eyes soft in the twilight. "About what?" "That day," she said, "on the mountain. You said I was weak. You said I would not survive." He looked at her, at the woman who had faced his world and her own, who had killed to protect him, who had pulled him back from the dead. He saw the mother of his children. He saw his foundation. "I was the weak one," he said, his voice rough. "I was a man hiding in the past. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You pulled me into the light. We found it together," she said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat in the quiet, watching their children, two free people in a free land. She had learned, in this wild place, that freedom was not a place. It was not the absence of walls. Freedom was a choice. It was a commitment. It was the sacrifice you were willing to make for love, and the love she had found, this hard, true, stone-solid love, was the only freedom that had ever mattered. Thank you for listening to this story, and I invite you to comment on where you are listening from, so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And please subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales, like the video, and support further by pressing the hype button so this story in the video can be heard by more people.